Something subtle is happening beneath the surface of everyday life, and most people don't have the language to name it. More and more individuals are noticing that social interaction itself has become exhausting in a way it never was before. Not irritating, not boring, not emotionally dramatic, simply draining. They don't dislike people. They aren't angry, resentful, or and that is precisely the problem. Every conversation now seems to cost something real. Every encounter leaves the body heavier, tighter, quieter. This isn't a loss of social skill or a sudden change in personality. It's not that you became cold or detached overnight. And it's not a conscious decision to withdraw from others. It's the nervous system speaking before the mind can catch up. What makes this experience so confusing is that it feels wrong in a culture that treats constant availability as health. You start questioning yourself. You wonder if you've become antisocial, damaged, or emotionally unavailable. But what if none of that is true? What if the exhaustion you feel after being around people isn't emotional at all, but physiological? What if your body is responding to human interaction the same way it responds to chronic stress, by conserving energy, reducing exposure, and pulling inward to survive? If being around people drains you more than ever, something fundamental has shifted in your internal regulation. Your system is no longer processing connection as neutral or nourishing. It is processing it as demand, as load, as something that requires constant monitoring, adjustment, and self-control. And when that happens, the body doesn't argue. It adapts quietly, invisibly. It lowers tolerance. It shortens patience. It seeks silence, not because it hates the world, but because silence is the only place it can finally breathe. Many people reach this state without any dramatic breakdown. There's no explosion, no crisis, just punta. Grow and sense that being alone feels safer than being understood, and quieter than being seen. If you recognize yourself here, don't rush to label it as a flaw. Pay attention instead to what your body is trying to protect. And if this resonates with you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your experience in the comments. You're not alone in this, even if it feels that way right now. Mary Ainsworth never framed human suffering as emotional drama or personal weakness. Her work was grounded in observation, pattern, and physiology. She understood something that still goes largely unrecognized today. The nervous system learns long before the mind creates explanations. Long before beliefs, narratives, or conscious choices. The body is already mapping safety and danger through experience. In Ainsworth's research, attachment was not about sentimentality or dependency. It was about regulation, about how the body calibrates itself in the presence of others. From infancy onward, the nervous system learns whether closeness is safe, unpredictable, overwhelming, or costly. These early patterns don't disappear with age. They become internal operating systems. When connection was consistently attuned, the body learned that proximity meant relief. When connection was inconsistent, intrusive, or emotionally demanding, the body learned vigilance. Not fear in the dramatic sense, but readiness. Monitoring, subtle tension that never fully shuts off. Ainsworth showed that attachment styles are not personality traits. They are physiological strategies designed to survive relational environments. This is why the body always reacts first. You can intellectually enjoy someone's company and still feel exhausted afterward. You can understand that a conversation was harmless and still feel drained, foggy, or tight. That response is not contradiction. It is conditioning. The nervous system does not respond to intention. It responds to patterns it has learned to associate with regulation or overload. And once a system has learned that interaction requires constant self-adjustment, emotional scanning, or boundary management, it begins to conserve energy automatically. Ainsworth's insight was radical in its simplicity. What we call emotional reactions are often regulatory responses. The body isn't being dramatic. It's being efficient. It pulls back not to punish, but to preserve. And when someone reaches a point where human interaction consistently costs more energy than it restores, the system adapts by reducing exposure, not out of avoidance, but out of intelligence. This is not spiritual awakening or emotional coldness. It is learned self-protection, encoded in the nervous system, long before the conscious mind tries to make sense of it. When social interaction begins to feel heavier instead of lighter, the first instinct is often People quickly label themselves as broken, antisocial, or emotionally unavailable. Y asume something must be wrong with their personality. But this interpretation misses what is actually happening. What you're experiencing is not social weakness, not extreme introversion, and not a sudden emotional shutdown. It is not even necessarily the result of a recent trauma. It is an adaptive state of the nervous system responding to accumulated relational demand. An introvert may need solitude to recharge, but still experiences connection as nourishing. What you're noticing is different. The fatigue doesn't come from stimulation alone, but from regulation. Your system is no longer simply interacting. It is constantly adjusting, filtering, and managing itself in the presence of others. That level of internal work consumes energy, whether you consciously feel anxious or not. Over time, the body learns that interaction equals expenditure. And once that association forms, withdrawal is not a choice. It is a biological response. This is also why labeling it as emotional coldness is inaccurate. Coldness implies a lack of feeling. In reality, many people in this state feel too much. Their system has spent years monitoring emotional cues, adapting to moods, preventing conflict, or carrying relational weight that was never reciprocated. The result is not numbness, but fatigue. A deep, quiet fatigue that makes the body prioritize safety over engagement. The nervous system is not rejecting people. It is protecting energy. It is reducing exposure to anything that requires constant self-regulation without sufficient return. This is an avoidance. It's conservation. Just as the body lowers metabolism when resources are scarce, it lowers social tolerance when connection has become costly. There is no failure in this. There is intelligence. The system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Preserve itself when demand exceeds capacity. And once you see it this way, the guilt begins to dissolve. Human interaction is not neutral to the nervous system. Every conversation, every shared space, every emotional exchange is processed as stimulation. For a regulated system, this stimulation flows in and out without leaving residue. But when attachment has been shaped by inconsistency, emotional unpredictability, or the need to self-adjust to stay connected, interaction becomes something else entirely. It becomes a task. In insecure attachment, the nervous system stays alert by default. It tracks tone timing, shifts in mood, unspoken expectations. This vigilance is not conscious anxiety. It is background monitoring. The body is constantly asking, is this safe? Do I need to adapt? Should I hold back or lean in? Over time, this continuous scanning consumes enormous energy. The system is never fully at rest in the presence of others. When vigilance becomes prolonged, exhaustion follows. Not emotional exhaustion in a dramatic sense, but physiological depletion. The nervous system recognizes that stimulation now costs more than it gives. And, like any intelligent system under strain, it adapts, it reduces exposure, it shortens tolerance, it seeks slow stimulation environments. This is energy economics, not personality change. The body enters conservation mode, pulling resources inward to prevent collapse. Silence, distance, and solitude become restorative, not because connection is bad, but because regulation has become expensive. At a certain point, something shifts. The nervous system stops trying to stretch itself to fit environments that constantly demand regulation. This is the turning point, and it often feels sudden, even though it has been building for years. What changes is not desire or morality, but capacity. The system no longer negotiates with overload. It no longer pushes through. Instead, it becomes selective. Social tolerance drops sharply, not because the person has become fragile, but because the body has learned its limits. Conversations that once felt manageable now feel intrusive. Environments that were once acceptable now feel loud, heavy, or draining. The nervous system is no longer experimenting with adaptation. It is protecting stability. This narrowing of tolerance can be frightening if it's misunderstood, because it looks like withdrawal from the outside. But this is not collapse. A collapsed system loses organization. What's happening here is the opposite. It is reorganization. The body is recalibrating what it can afford. It closes certain channels so that others can remain functional. This state is rare because it only appears after prolonged It marks the moment the nervous system stops sacrificing itself for connection and begins restructuring around sustainability. What follows this shift is a form of solitude that isn't chosen emotionally or intellectually. It emerges from the body. The mind may still want connection, conversation, closeness, but the body responds differently. After interactions, there is tension in the chest, heaviness in the limbs, a quiet shutdown that feels physical rather than psychological. Energy drops, focus fades. Even brief encounters can leave a lingering sense of depletion that rest doesn't immediately fix. What's striking is the contrast. The moment the person is alone, something changes. Breathing deepens, muscles release. Doctors, slow. There is no loneliness in the dramatic sense, only relief. This relief is not avoidance, it's feedback. The body is signaling where it can recover. Over time, the nervous system begins to associate human presence with cost and solitude with restoration. This is why the isolation doesn't feel sad. It feels necessary. The body is not rejecting people out of fear or resentment. It is responding to patterns it has learned. When interaction consistently requires effort and self-regulation, the system chooses environments where that effort is no longer needed. Somatic solitude is not about wanting less connection. It is about needing less stimulation so the body can remain stable. For many people in this state, relationships are exhausting not because of conflict, but because of constant internal labor. While the conversation may look normal from the outside, the nervous system is working continuously in the background. Tone is monitored for subtle shifts. Words are carefully chosen. Responses are adjusted to avoid tension. Reactions are predicted before they happen. Emotional atmospheres are managed to keep things smooth. None of this is deliberate manipulation. It is automatic. This pattern often develops early, in environments where connection depended on being attuned, careful, or emotionally responsive beyond one's capacity. Over time, the body learns that staying connected requires constant adjustment. What looks like empathy becomes something else entirely. Healthy empathy allows for resonance without hyperadaptation, on the other hand, demands vigilance. It asks the nervous system to stay ahead of others' emotions to prevent rupture. The cost of this is invisible but profound. Energy is spent before anything is said. By the time an interaction ends, the body is already depleted. There may be no memory of stress, no emotional charge to point to, only fatigue. This is why solitude feels restorative. In silence, there's nothing to manage, nothing to anticipate, nothing to regulate. The nervous system finally exits performance mode. This isn't emotional generosity, it's learned over-functioning, and it drains the system over time. As this pattern deepens, the nervous system begins to express itself through signals that are often misunderstood. A strong desire for silence appears, not as withdrawal from life, but as a need to reduce stimulation. Social patience shortens, even with people you care about, because the system no longer has surplus energy to regulate continuously. Irritation arises without anger, without a clear target, simply as a sign of overload. And there is a fatigue that doesn't resolve with sleep, because it isn't caused by exertion, but by constant internal management. These signs are frequently labeled as psychological problems. People assume depression, burnout, or emotional detachment. But depression carries a sense of emptiness or hopelessness. What's happening here is different. There is still clarity, awareness, and often a desire for meaningful connection. The issue is capacity. The nervous system has been operating above its sustainable threshold for too long. This is regulatory. Exhaustion. The body has spent years maintaining balance in environments that required hypervigilance and adaptation. Now, it is signaling that it cannot continue at the same pace. Silence becomes medicine. Simplicity becomes necessary. The symptoms are not warnings of collapse. They are communications of limit. This is not a loss of vitality. It is the system asking for conditions where it can finally recover. As the nervous system reaches its limit, the process of withdrawal begins to unfold. Naturally, almost without conscious effort, invitations to social events become fewer. Not because the person is actively rejecting others, but because the body begins to decline engagements that feel energetically taxing. Conversations that once seemed manageable now require more energy to navigate, and so the desire for simplicity and quiet grows. The individual pulls back, not out of anger or resentment, but out of a deep, physiological need to preserve energy. This withdrawal isn't about isolating due to negativity. It's a response to internal cues that indicate the person might still care deeply about others, but the body can no longer tolerate the constant ebb and flow of social interaction without significant energy cost. The emotional and mental work required to maintain these connections becomes too much to bear. So the system begins to withdraw. It's not rejection of people, it's a need for regulation. The body is no longer able to function in environments where it's constantly adjusting, scanning, and managing emotional energy. This isn't voluntary avoidance, it's physiological self-preservation. By stepping back, the individual creates the space necessary to regain balance, to return to a state where they can function at their full capacity. This withdrawal is a form of self-care, not a sign of emotional weakness. The archetype of withdrawal is not about running away from the world, but about retreating to a space where the nervous system can begin to heal after prolonged exposure to high levels of social demand, emotional regulation, and mental strain. The body reaches a point where it must seek silence, not as avoidance, but as a necessity for repair. During this phase, low stimulation becomes essential. The nervous system requires an environment that doesn't trigger constant adjustment, where it can settle into itself without the weight of external expectations. Silence transforms into medicine. It is in the quiet that the body and mind can recalibrate. Without the need to manage others' emotions or monitor social cues, the system can finally focus on its own recovery. The absence of noise, both internal and external, becomes the perfect condition for the body to restore its energy reserves. Distance from social interaction becomes a form of safety. In this solitude, the nervous system is allowed to drop its guard and simply exist, unburdened by the need for constant performance. This is a phase where the body relearns to rest. It's not a passive retreat, but an active process of healing. The system is not shutting down. It is recalibrating, finding its natural rhythm again. Through this period of low stimulation and the body reclaims its capacity to engage with the world at a sustainable pace when it is ready. Isolation often carries negative connotations in society. It's seen as a sign of emotional coldness, selfishness, or even arrogance. People who withdraw are often labeled as antisocial or indifferent to the needs of others. But this perception fails to understand the deeper, physiological reasons behind the need for solitude. The person who retreats isn't necessarily rejecting the world or others. Rather, they are responding to a deep, internal need for rest and repair. Isolation, in this context, is not about superiority. It's not about being better or more evolved than others. It's not a moral judgment or an indication of emotional coldness. Instead, it is the nervous system's way of protecting itself. The body, after being pushed too far for too long, signals that it can no longer carry the weight of constant social expectation, emotional labor, or relational demands. It says, I need space. I need quiet. I need to stop carrying this burden. When someone chooses solitude, it is not out of a desire to withdraw from love or connection. It is out of necessity. It's a body telling itself that it has carried too much for too long. The person is not selfish for retreating. They are honoring the signals their body is giving them, recognizing that they must step back to preserve their energy and regain their balance. The act of isolation, therefore, is not a moral failing. It is an act of self-care, a way to recalibrate before being able to engage with the world again. During the process of isolation, there is more happening beneath the surface than simply withdrawal. It is a period of nervous system recalibration, a quiet but profound restructuring. Just as the body heals a wound by forming new tissue, the nervous system is rebuilding its boundaries, its capacity to regulate itself, and its relationship to external demands. This is not a death of connection or a failure of social ability. It is a reprogramming of safety. As the system withdraws from overstimulation, it begins to set stronger internal boundaries. These boundaries aren't just physical or social, but emotional. The ability to say no without guilt, to protect personal space without the fear of rejection, and to prioritize self-care without the pressure of external expectations is developed during this time. This process fosters a deep sense of emotional autonomy, where the individual learns to listen to their body's needs instead of constantly responding to the demands of others. What feels like isolation is actually a phase of rebuilding inner strength and balance. The nervous system is not shutting down. It is learning to operate in a way that preserves energy and supports emotional well-being. This rebuilding is necessary for creating long-term resilience, allowing the person to interact with the world from a place of strength rather than depletion. When the person eventually re-engages with the outside world, they do so with a renewed sense of clarity and control over their emotional landscape. This process is vital for re-establishing a sense of personal safety and emotional integrity. When the nervous system begins to stabilize, again, social life does not return to what it was before. The return is quieter, more deliberate, and fundamentally different. There is no urge to re-enter every space or reconnect with everyone who once had access. Instead, the system becomes selective. Fewer people are allowed in, not out of fear, but out of discernment. The body now recognizes which interactions nourish and which deplete, and it no longer negotiates that truth. Tolerance for emotional noise drops sharply. Conversations filled with tension, performative emotions, or unspoken demands feel immediately draining. Small talk that once could be endured now feels heavy. This isn't rigidity or intolerance. It's accuracy. The nervous system has learned what regulation costs, and it refuses to spend energy where there is no return. Depth becomes more important than frequency. Safety becomes more important than approval. Connection, when it happens, is cleaner and more grounded. There is less explaining, less adjusting, less managing. Presence replaces performance. Quality quietly replaces quantity. The person may appear more distant from the outside, but internally they are more available than ever, just no longer to everyone. This is not a narrowing of life. It is a refinement. The system is no longer surviving relationships. It is choosing them. At the deepest level, this experience can be distilled into a simple truth that reframes everything. People don't exhaust you because you are weak, fragile, or incapable of connection. They exhaust you because your nervous system has learned too much. It has spent years reading rooms, sensing shifts, adapting to emotional climates, and carrying relational weight that was never meant to be carried alone. That learning came at a cost, and now the body remembers it instantly. The exhaustion you feel is not a malfunction. It is a signal of adaptive intelligence. The nervous system is designed to learn from experience and adjust behavior to preserve life. When interaction repeatedly leads to depletion, the system doesn't argue or complain. It changes strategy. It lowers tolerance, reduces exposure, and prioritizes stability. This is not emotional collapse. It is biological wisdom at work. At its core, your body is choosing survival over approval, regulation over performance, and sustainability over sacrifice. What feels like withdrawal is actually a decision made beneath consciousness to protect what remains. Once you understand this, the shame dissolves. There is nothing wrong with you. Your system is not failing. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Keep you alive, intact, and functional in a world that demanded too much for too long. If you recognize yourself in this, it's important to pause and let the message land fully. If being around people drains you now in a way it never did before, it does not mean you've become colder, weaker, or less capable of connection. It means your system has changed. It has matured. It has learned through experience what costs too much and what cannot be sustained anymore. This shift doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up quietly, through fatigue, through a need for space, through a reduced tolerance for emotional noise. You may notice that what once felt normal now feels heavy. Conversations that used to flow now require effort. Environments you once adapted to now feel misaligned. That doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means your nervous system is no longer willing to overextend itself for the sake of belonging. It has moved from endurance to discernment. If this is where you are, there is nothing to fix. You are not regressing. You are integrating. Your body is no longer trying to prove its worth through adaptation. It is protecting its stability. This is not becoming less human. It is becoming more accurate, more honest, more aligned with what your system actually needs to remain whole. You are allowed to step back. You are allowed to reduce contacts, to decline invitations, to choose silence over conversation when your body asks for it. This permission does not come from withdrawal or fear, but from awareness. You do not owe constant access to anyone at the expense of your own regulation. Being selective is not cruelty. It is clarity. You are also allowed to listen to your body without justifying it intellectually. If your system tightens in certain environments, if exhaustion follows specific interactions, that information matters. The nervous system communicates through sensation, not argument. Ignoring those signals in order to appear polite, available, or agreeable only deepens depletion. Honoring them restores balance. There is no guilt required here. No explanation is necessary. You do not need to narrate your boundaries or translate your limits into language others will accept. Your responsibility is not to be endlessly accessible, but to remain intact. When you stop overriding your body's signals, regulation begins to return naturally. This is not selfishness. It is self-respect at the physiological level. And from that place, whatever connection you choose will be real, sustainable, and freely given. The silence you are drawn to is not an escape from life or from people. It is a return to something your system has been missing for a long time. In quiet, there is no performance required, no emotional monitoring, no pressure to respond or adjust. The nervous system finally receives a signal it recognizes as safety, breathing slows, muscles soften, thoughts lose their urgency. This is not emptiness, it is restoration. Silence creates a conditions where your system can remember what regulation feels like without effort. It allows the body to settle without scanning for cues or anticipating demands. In that space, nothing is being asked of you, and that absence is what makes healing possible. What you are seeking is not isolation, but relief from constant stimulation and expectation. Tere is wisdom. In this pull toward quiet, it is the body guiding itself back to balance, back to a baseline where connection can exist without cost. You don't need to rush this phase or explain it. Let the silence do its work. It is not taking you away from life. It is teaching your system how to feel safe enough to return, whole and unforced, when the time is right. If this perspective resonates with you, it's because your system recognizes itself in these words. This space was created for people who learned early how to adapt, read environments, and carry emotional weight, and are now learning something equally important: how to protect themselves without guilt. You're not here by accident. You're here because you're ready to relate to yourself differently. If you feel seen, take a moment to like this video. It helps this message reach others who are quietly experiencing the same shift but don't yet have the language for it. Subscribe to the channel if you want to continue exploring these themes of nervous system regulation, attachment, and emotional sustainability in a way that is grounded, calm, and real. And if you're comfortable, share your experience in the comments. Writing it out can be part of the integration process. This channel isn't about fixing you. It's about understanding what your body has been doing all along to keep you safe. Here, adaptation becomes awareness, and awareness becomes choice. You don't have to rush. You don't have to explain yourself. Just have to stay connected to what your system is asking for now.